The handouts or review materials must be treated with utmost confidentiality. It shall be the responsibility of the person whose name appears therein that the handouts or review materials are not photocopied or in any way reproduced, shared, or lent to any person or disposed in any manner. Any handouts or review materials found in the possession of another person whose name does not appear therein shall be prima facie evidence of violation of RA 8293. Top-notch review materials are updated every 6 months based on the current trends and feedback. Please buy all recommended review books and other materials.
Welcome to the second module, Neuro Physiology. So, nag-usap kami ni Dr. Frins dito. So, for succession planning, I'll be teaching you A and S, yung module 2.1. And then module 2.2, 2.3, 2.4. Okay, so that is sensory physio, motor physio, and higher CNS. That will be given by Dr. Frins Rubio. Don't worry kasi even those topics I'll be covering din naman pagdating ng PERS. Okay, so Dr. Rubio will handle part of this module. The first part is mine, which is autonomic nervous system physiology. Okay? So, Doc, first week namin sa Top Notch. Anong gagawin ngayon kapag natapos na kami ng isang module? Pag natapos na kayo ng isang module, okay, next module na, just do, for the next 5 or 10 minutes, kindly just give a quick glance dun sa previous module. Okay? Try to basically link ano yung nabasa nyo dun sa module 1, sa cell, tsaka sa muscle, with this one. Okay? So, gagawin nyo yan. Every time you start a new module, do a quick glance ng previous na module natin. Okay? So, let's discuss ANS, Autonomic Nervous System. Okay? So, the nervous system, we can divide that basically into your somatic and autonomic nervous system. Somatic nervous system, ang endpoint niyan is that it will stimulate skeletal muscles. While the autonomic nervous system, ang endpoint niyan is that it will stimulate cardiac and smooth muscles. Okay? The somatic nervous system is voluntary. The autonomic nervous system is involuntary. The somatic nervous system will use one motor neuron. Okay? It's a one motor neuron system. Isa lang yung gagamitin. While the autonomic nervous system, dalawang motor neurons yung gagamitin. Those motor neurons, we call them your preganglionic neuron and your postganglionic neuron. Okay? ANS, we have your sympa and parasympathetic nervous system. Fight or flight is sympa. Rest and digest is para. Enteric nervous system is different. Classically, we call the enteric nervous system as the local innervation of the GI tract. We also call it, previous board exam question, the second brain. Why was it called the second brain, Doc? Because usually, the enteric nervous system will function independent from the ANS. It's given autonomy, parang similar to, halimbawa, the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. It's allowed to operate by itself at a local level, okay, at the level of the GI tract. And then yung ANS mo, the sympa and para, will only come in when there is crisis or when there is an emergency. Parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system can override the enteric nervous system, but they usually allow it to operate independent. Para will stimulate. Sympa will inhibit, okay, the enteric nervous system. That enteric nervous system is made up of your submucosal plexus, also called your Meissner, and your myenteric plexus, also called your Auerbach plexus. We'll discuss this in GI physiology, these two. Okay, for now, we'll focus on your autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, okay, it's efferent. Meaning, ang track mo will be from brain all the way to the target organs, the skeleton, the smooth, and the cardiac muscles. So, it's efferent in comparison, for example, to your sensory system, which is afferent. Okay, pabalik. From sensory receptors, pabalik ng brain. It's autonomic, meaning it's involuntary, not under conscious control, made up of sympa and parasympathetic nervous system. Okay? So, there are differences, okay, in terms of this. Let's utilize pictures para mas madaling magets. Okay? This is your somatic nervous system, the one for your skeletal muscles. You have a It's just a single motor neuron system. You have this motor neuron, dendrites, soma, axon, okay, neural fibril, terminal botons. Okay, you have here the neuromuscular junction, okay, where acetylcholine is secreted, and where acetylcholine, okay, will bind with the ligand-gated ion channels that we've discussed earlier. Okay, now for SYMPA and PARA. SYMPA, you must have remembered this, is fight or flight. So anything that has to do with emergency or any fight or flight response, that's SYMPA. Parasympathetic nervous system is rest and digest. So in a relaxed state, it's your parasympathetic nervous system that will predominate. Take note that they will utilize two motor neurons. Ano yun, Doc? A preganglionic neuron that communicates with a postganglionic neuron. So may synapse dyan, tapos may neurotransmitter between them. Okay? Between the preganglionic neuron, postganglionic neuron. The postganglionic neuron will secrete neurotransmitters that will bind with the target organ or the effector organ made up of smooth muscles and cardiac muscles. Okay? First, Doc, why did they call it ganglion? Okay? When you hear the term ganglion, ganglion is a collection of somas or cell bodies. So kapag tinignan mo itong postganglionic neuron mo na to, eto, marami siya actually mga katabi. Okay? Na soma dyan. Collectively, we call this a ganglion. Okay? That's why, tingnan nyo ang nomenclature. Yung axon before this ganglion, before this group of soma, we call it your preganglionic tract. Yung axons, okay, after this soma, okay, part ng axon ng postganglionic neuron, we call this your postganglionic tract. Okay? Now, you will notice, Doc, iba yung lengths ng preganglionic neuron ng SYMPA and PARA. Opposites. If you will take a look, PARA will have a long preganglionic tract. Okay? It will have a short postganglionic tract. The opposite is true for SYMPA. SYMPA will have a short preganglionic tract and a long postganglionic tract. So, bakit ganun, Doc? Bakit magkaiba sila? The reason for that is the location of the somas, the location of the ganglions. Okay? Iba sa para versus sa SYMPA. Classically, take a look at your handout. In the parasympathetic nervous system, the soma of the postganglionic neuron, okay, is located close to the target organ. Okay? While the soma ng sympathetic nervous system, classical in description niyan, is located at the paravertebral areas. Anong ibig sabihin ng Doc? Kung ito is found close to the target organ, malapit sa target organ mo, ang implication niyan, yung preganglionic tract mo will be very long. Okay? Your postganglionic tract will be shorter kasi malapit ka na sa effector organ. Kapag naman SYMPA, the ganglion are located at the paravertebral area. Para means near. So it's near the vertebra. It's near the spinal cord. So kung malapit ito sa spinal cord, itong ganglion natin, ang implication niyan, your preganglionic tract now will be short. While you're so far away from the target organ, the postganglionic tract will be long. So long preganglionic tract, short postganglionic tract, para. Short preganglionic tract, long postganglionic tract, SYMPA. Okay? Next, the distribution. The parasympathetic nervous system classically has been described as having a craniosacral distribution. While the sympathetic nervous system classically has been described as having a thoracolumbar distribution. So ano ibig sabihin noon? There are 12 cranial nerves and 31 spinal nerves. If you remember your basic anatomy, those 31 spinal nerves are 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, 1 coccygeal. So ngayon, okay, when they go out of the spinal cord, ang parasympathetic nervous system will use cranial nerves and sacral nerves. While the sympathetic nervous system will use thoracic nerves and lumbar nerves as it goes out of the spinal cord. Pang-boards, anong cranial nerves, Doc, ang ginagamit sa parasympathetic nervous system? What is our mnemonic for this? What are the parasympathetic cranial nerves? Is it 1972, 1973, or 1975? The correct answer, ang mnemonic natin, okay, for the cranial nerves involved in the parasympathetic nervous system is 1973. 10, 9, 7, and 2. 1972. These are your vitamin K dependent clotting factors. You've heard of that probably during med school. Vitamin K dependent clotting factors. Okay? 1973, these are your parasympathetic cranial nerves. Okay? In 1975, these are your mixed motor and sensory cranial nerves. Okay? 10975. 1973 is 10973. Okay? So, craniosacral distribution, thoracolumbar distribution. Okay, next. Let's take a look at the neurotransmitters being used. For preganglionic neuron to communicate with the postganglionic neuron, for both sympa and para, they will utilize acetylcholine. This acetylcholine will bind with nicotinic N receptors found in the dendrites or soma of the postganglionic neuron ng sympa and para. Postganglionic neurons, okay, meanwhile, will secrete different neurotransmitters that targets the effector organ or target organs. For para, it's still going to use acetylcholine. So, it will utilize acetylcholine twice. Okay? Acetylcholine dito from preganglionic to postganglionic. Acetylcholine din dito from postganglionic neuron to the target organ. Okay? Your postganglionic neuron ng sympa will release norepinephrine. So, the main secretion of the postganglionic neuron is norepinephrine. Okay? Now, the final receptors. Okay, final receptors ng parasympathetic nervous system is M1 to M5. While for the sympathetic nervous system, it's your adrenergic receptors. So, for para, it's muscarinic receptors, muscarinic, M1 to M5. For sympa, it's adrenergic receptors. Yan yung na rin yung alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3. Okay? Next, compare that with the adrenal glands. Okay? In your adrenal glands, you have here a neuron that will release acetylcholine that binds with, okay, write this down, the chromaffin cells of the adrenal medulla. Okay? The chromaffin cells of the adrenal medulla, I call it OFWs. Bakit? Kasi actually yung chromaffin cells na yan, hindi yan endocrine cells. They are actually neurons na nang ibang bayan napunta doon sa adrenals. Okay? Which is an endocrine organ. Okay? So these chromaffin cells or OFWs are actually neurons. These chromaffin cells will secrete 80% epinephrine, a previous board exam question, and 20% norepinephrine. Okay? Can you live without the adrenal medulla? Can you live without the epinor or epi produced by adrenal medulla? The answer is yes. Simply because we still produce norepinephrine from our postganglionic neuron. However, this epi and norepinephrine will supplement the effects of norepinephrine produced by the postganglionic neuron, okay, as they attach to your adrenergic receptors. Okay? Now, M1, M2, M3, M4, M5 are your muscarinic receptors. Okay? Alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3 are your adrenergic receptors. So what are key points I'd like to make here? Okay? Let's talk about their functions and their keynotes. Okay? Some things that I want you to remember. When you hear the term alpha 1, I always want you to associate with smooth muscle contraction. When you hear the term beta 2, I always want you to associate with smooth muscle relaxation. Always and without exceptions, if you stimulate alpha 1, it's going to cause smooth muscles to contract. If you stimulate beta 2, it's going to cause smooth muscles to relax. Okay? So, complete opposite. So, for example, vasoconstriction of your arterioles. Okay, your arterioles will have circular muscles in the tunica media. So, if you want vasoconstriction to happen, you want smooth muscle contraction of those circular shaped muscles. So, you will utilize alpha 1. Okay? If you want, for example naman, bronchodilation Okay, bronchial airways will also have circular shapes. So if you want the bronchioles to relax, you want bronchial smooth muscles to relax also for you to have bronchodilation. So for bronchodilation, you're going to find there not alpha 1 but beta 2. Because when stimulated, beta 2 will cause those smooth muscles to relax. Okay? Next, when you hear the term beta 1, I want you to associate it with two parts. Puso at bato. So puso at bato, beta 1. Okay, beta 1 is found in the heart. Okay? It is found, for example, in both atrium and ventricles. In the atrium, okay? In the SA node, it's the one when stimulated when cause an increase in heart rate. Okay? It's also found in the AV node, increasing your conduction velocity. It's found in the ventricles, that beta 1, okay, to increase ventricular contraction, increasing stroke volume. And in the kidneys, previous board exam question, beta 1, when stimulated, this will stimulate your renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. So it's the one that will link RAAS with the cardiovascular system. Okay? Alpha 2 is interesting. Okay? You see it in platelets, fat cells, and the walls of the GI tract. But the most important location of your alpha 2 is here. In the sympathetic, postganglionic, presynaptic nerve terminals. What does that mean, Doc? Okay? It means, if this is your terminal button ng postganglionic neuron mo, okay? And if this is your target organ, in the target organ, you may find alpha 1, beta 1, or beta 2. Your alpha 2, most of it is actually located here in the presynaptic, before the synapse. Presynaptic nerve terminals, nandyan yung alpha 2. And when stimulated, this alpha 2 will prevent the release of norepinephrine. So, ang alpha 2 is ang tridor ng sympathetic nervous system. Okay? Siya yung Indian among the cowboys. Okay? In terms of the sympathetic nervous system. Okay? So, when stimulated, it will inhibit the release of norepinephrine, decreasing sympathetic effects. That's why, if you take a look, very interesting, ito yung napansin ko when I was in med school. If you look at the drugs that we gave for hypertension, makakita ka dyan, beta blocker. Okay? Beta 1 or beta 2, selective, non-selective. But you're also going to see alpha agonist. So, pareho lang namang adrenergic yan. Pareho lang namang fight or flight. So, bakit for drugs for hypertension, why do you have a beta blocker? Okay, and why do you have an alpha agonist? Bakit hindi alpha blocker yung ginagamit natin? The reason when we say alpha agonist is we're specifically talking about alpha 2 agonism. So, anong ginagawa? By stimulating alpha 2 receptors, you're going to inhibit norepi release, right? So, you're going to decrease the sympathetic effects. You're going to inhibit, okay, blood pressure from going up. So, it will decrease your blood pressure, okay, by stimulating alpha 2 agonist. While beta blockers, you block beta 1, okay, you will decrease heart rate, cardiac out, you will decrease heart rate, stroke volume, cardiac output, and blood pressure, okay, at the end of the day because beta 1 is seen in the heart, okay? So, yun ang ibig sabihin mainly ng beta blocker, specifically referring to the beta 1 in the context of antihypertensive agents. And you're talking about alpha 2 agonist when we talk of alpha agonist in the context, once again, of antihypertensive drugs. Okay? Beta 3 receptors, okay, when stimulated, are found in your brown adipose tissue. In the neonates, to increase their heat production. You have to remember, when babies are born, okay, even if they are their thermoregulatory centers in the hypothalamus are still immature. So they cannot properly thermoregulate, para silang cold-blooded pa ng pinanganak. So because God loves babies, He gave them brown fat. In the brown fat, may thermogenin at merong beta-3 receptors, all to increase the temperature. Okay, lipolysis, brown fat, increase temperature. Okay, that is done using beta-3. Okay? Muscarinic receptors come in 5 flavors, M1 to M5. But the most important, more relevant, is M1 all the way to M3. M1, location. Okay, touch your head. Okay, this is your M1. It's found in the brain, for example. M2, touch your heart. Touch your chest. That is M2, found in the heart. And finally, M3, touch your organs below the abdomen. That is your M3. Okay? Your other organs. Okay? So, mnemonic to help you remember the location of M1, M2, M3 because they've been asked before. Okay? M1, M2, M3. If you love someone, you use the following organs in sequence, in order of priority. When you love someone, you use your head, M1. Before you use your heart, M2. Before you use your other organs, M3. Okay? So, M1, M2, M3. G proteins. When you use the term G proteins, a G protein is a transducer of a chemical signal. Anong ibig sabihin ng doc? It will act as a chemical bridge. Anong ibig sabihin ng doc? Di ko pa rin gets. So, halimbawa, meron kang norepinephrine or acetylcholine na magbabind dito sa receptor mo. Okay? You've heard of the term second messenger systems, right? Your cyclic AMP, IP3DAG, tyrosine kinase. Okay? Your G protein is found here between all of them. G proteins. We call them G proteins because they are guanylyl triphosphate activated. Kung magpapasindak dyan sa GTP, parehas lang yan ng ATP. You can actually convert ATP to GTP and vice versa. So when you have this norepi or acetylcholine binding with the receptors, it will now utilize a chemical bridge, okay, a transducer, that's the proper term that we use, called your G proteins. Your G proteins will then match it with the appropriate second messenger system. Okay? Your G protein will match the first messenger with the second messenger. The first messenger is your hormone or neurotransmitters. Okay? The second messenger systems, those are your IP3DAG, tyrosine kinase, etc. The endpoint of this, okay, is to add phosphate to an already existing enzyme. When you add phosphate on a already existing enzyme, okay, it will activate that enzyme and cause the final cellular effect. Okay? So that's basically how your neurotransmitters, protein hormones will work. Okay? By doing this. So, your G proteins, okay, kailangan tutukan natin ngayon, will have several types, subunits, GS, GI, GQ. Okay? Yan yung mga subunits nila. Okay? So, take a look. Each of those receptors, adrenergic or muscarinic, will have different G proteins and different second messenger systems. Some mnemonics to help you. The mnemonic is kiss and kick. Kiss and then kick. GQ, GI, GS, from alpha 1 all the way to beta 3. M1 to M3, we have, okay, kick. Kiss and kick. Okay? Now, sino yung mga gumagamit ng cyclic AMP, IP3DAG? Alpha 1 will use IP3DAG along with M2 and M3. Alpha 1, M1, M3 will use IP3DAG. Everything else will use cyclic AMP. Either it will increase or decrease them. Okay? Now, some mnemonics to help you. Okay? Remember this mnemonic, plasma. Ano ibig sabihin, Doc, ng plasma? Parasympathetic nervous system will have a long preganglionic tract. Okay? Will utilize acetylcholine twice, not just once. Yan yung neurotransmitter niya, acetylcholine. Okay? It will have a short postganglionic tract. Long preganglionic, short postganglionic. And the final receptors are muscarinic receptors. Plasma. Just do the opposite for SIMPA. SIMPA will have a short preganglionic tract, long postganglionic tract, will only utilize acetylcholine once, not twice. The final receptors are adrenergic. The final neurotransmitter is norepinephrine. So remember this classic mnemonic, plasma. Okay? Just do the opposite for SIMPA. Ano mo na yan, madederive mo na. Okay? So, as a quick review, okay, how do you know if an action is a SIMPA or para? Classically, what I tell my students is this. If someone points a gun at your head, everything that happens to your body is SIMPA. Okay? Everything that happens, when someone points a gun at your head, everything that happens to your body is SIMPA. Okay? Tinutukan kita ng baril. Will you have Mydriasis or meiosis? Mydriasis, right? Pupillary dilation to see the enemy better. Will you have increase or decrease sweating? Increase sweating. Tachycardia, bradycardia. Tachycardia. Okay. Bronchodilation. Okay. Will you have urination whenever you see him, whenever someone points a gun at your head? Or will you have erection when someone points a gun at your head? Of course not. Okay, alam ka naman tinutukan ka ng baril, tinigasan ka pa, napaka-kinky naman, di ba? So, yun na yung para. Everything again that happens to your body when someone points a gun at your head, that will be your clue that it is SIMPA. Because SIMPA is fight or flight. Also take note of the concept that we call mass discharge. Ano yung mass discharge, Doc? It means your sympathetic nervous system will have sympathetic effects occurring at the same time. Para, the effects will happen one at a time. Like for para, I have yet to see a person who can have erection, urination, and defecation happening all at the same time. Wala yun. One at a time palagi sa para. Pero simpa, may mass discharge yan. If you have pupillary dilation, meron kang tachycardia, meron kang bronchodilation, they can all happen at the same time. Okay? So, quick quiz. It's not written in your handout. You don't even need to write this down in your handout. Just answer with me. Okay? Tell me whether it is simpa or para. Mydriasis, simpa or para? Okay, answer on your own. Voice it out. Huwag kayong mahihiya. Kung may kasama kayo sa room, huwag kayong mahiya. Seryoso na to. Boards na to. Sagot lang. Mydriasis, simpa or para? Simpa. Mydriasis is pupillary dilation as opposed to meiosis, which is pupillary constriction. Contraction of the ciliary muscle or near vision, this is simpa or para? Para. This is also called your accommodation. And this will utilize cranial nerve 3. Okay? Sweating, is it simpa or para? Sweating, okay, will utilize simpa. However, take note, the final receptor for sweating are your muscarinic receptors. And the final neurotransmitter utilized in the sweat glands is acetylcholine. So the distribution is thoracolumbar, similar to simpa. Okay? However, final neurotransmitter and receptors are different. Overall, sweating is still classified as a sympathetic event. Okay, next. Vasodilation and vasoconstriction are simpa or para? Both of them are actually simpa. Vasodilation is done via stimulation of beta 2. Vasoconstriction is done via the stimulation of alpha 1. So we have a concept called singly innervated organs. Okay, it is a misconception na kung ang isang organ may simpa, dapat may para. Kung may para, dapat may simpa. That's a misconception. Some organs are singly innervated. We actually have that in your handout, the list of organs with singly innervated. For example, sympathetic innervation lang, walang para. That will include your almost all of your blood vessels, the pregnant uterus, okay, and your cardiac ventricles. So in those areas, cardiac ventricles, most of your blood vessels, almost all, plus the pregnant uterus, you're only going to see a sympathetic innervation. Vasodilation is therefore simpa. Vasoconstriction is also simpa, but they will just utilize different adrenergic receptors. Ganun din for the uterus, uterine contraction and relaxation are both simpa. The difference is for uterine contraction, you will utilize alpha 1. For uterine relaxation, you're going to use beta 2. Both are simpa. Bronchoconstriction, simpa or para? Okay, para. Bronchodilation yung simpa. Increase GI motility. So, rest and digest, para. GI sphincter relaxation. So, usually ang panglito sa estudyante is GI sphincter relaxation and contraction, no? Pag ang sphincters nag-contract, it will prevent substances from moving from mouth to anus. So for GI sphincter contraction, that is considered simpa. GI sphincter relaxation will allow movement of food from mouth to anus, so rest and digest. Yun ang classified as para. Increased GI motility is para. Okay, GI sphincter relaxation is para. Detrusor muscle contraction and genitourinary sphincter relaxation. Detrusor muscle, okay, is the smooth muscles in your urinary bladder. A previous board exam question. Genitourinary sphincter relaxation, okay? So when this happens, when these two combine, you will have urination. So urination is of course para. Pregnant uterine contraction relaxation is SIMPA. Pregnant uterine contraction is done once again via alpha 1. Pregnant uterine relaxation is done via beta 2. Glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis, well, pakiramdam mo pa lang sa tenga, parang, uy, doc, parang pang fight or flight yun ah. So that is SIMPA. Increased exocrine pancreatic secretion is parasympathetic. Lipolysis provides you with energy for fighting or fleeing, not flying away. So SIMPA. Okay? Now, ito yung mga pang curveball when it comes to the boards, as previously. Salivary amylase secretion. Salivary amylase is also called your thiolin enzyme for carb digestion in the mouth. Salivary amylase or thiolin secretion, that is classified as SIMPA. And pineal gland melatonin synthesis is also classified as SIMPA. Very nice table here. Okay. What's been asked before? Okay. March 2023, they asked what is the autonomic receptor involved in ejaculation. You all know ejaculation is a SIMPA. Okay. But what is the receptor involved? So that is alpha 1. Okay. And what are the receptors utilized for fat cells? Okay. For white adipose tissue found in adults, it's beta 1. For brown adipose tissue found in neonates, it's beta 3. So beta 1, beta 3. Okay? All the rest, we more or less discuss. Okay? So remember, ano pa yung mga gusto nating tutukan dito? Some drugs that can affect autonomic activity. A favorite in the med boards, I've included them in your handout. So here's a quick glance table kung ano yung mga mag-stimulate ng each of those adrenergic receptors at ano yung equivalent na mag-i-inhibit. Single innervated area, the one I was talking about earlier. So most blood vessels, cardiac ventricles, pregnant uterus, along with other sites listed here are singly innervated, meaning they only have SIMPA, walang para, or vice versa. The adrenal medulla, just like what I previously mentioned, is not essential for life. It secretes 80% epinephrine. Okay? So that's it for your autonomic nervous system. Autonomic centers and cerebral cortex. Okay? The midbrain, pons, and medulla are collectively called your brainstem. The brainstem, we used to call it your primitive brain. We used to call it your reptilian brain. Previous board exam question. Why is it a primitive reptilian brain, doc? In our evolution, the midbrain, pons, and medulla actually developed first before the cerebral cortex. Everything that you need to live, anything needed for survival, can actually be found in the brainstem. That's why in our evolution, it developed first. Okay? Instead of yung mga higher cortical thinking, higher cortical processes na nangyayari sa cerebral cortex. Ito muna, the one that you actually need to live. So, ano yung mga functions niyan? The medulla, for example, is where you're going to find the vasomotor center, the one that controls blood pressure and heart rate. This is also where you're going to find the respiratory centers, the one that controls breathing. Okay, number 1 dyan is the dorsal respiratory group for breathing at rest and during exercise. Ventral respiratory group will supplement the effects of DRG during exercise. Swallowing, coughing, vomiting, anything that has to do with the mouth is also seen in the medulla. Okay, the medulla is probably the most important part of your brain for me, personally. Okay, because everything that you need to live can actually be found in the medulla. Controls your heart rate, blood pressure, controls your respiration. That's why special operations teams, okay, soldiers and cops, okay, they have been trained to always shoot between the eyes. Okay, why? If you shoot between the eyes, the bullet will travel and transect, okay, across the medulla, destroying the medulla. And if you destroy the medulla, the patient will stop having a heart rate and the patient will stop breathing. Deads for sure. Okay? Next, the pons is where you're going to find the micturition center. Okay? Your urination center. If you read Physio BRS, all books have mistakes. Unfortunately, tao lang gumagawa eh. Kahit Harrison's guys meron. Nakita namin din dati. It's try to remove that ego kapag yung, uy, may mali ako, walang mali. Gago ka ba? Magkakamali ka rin eventually kapag ikaw yung sumusulat ng libro or gumagawa ng mga materials. Inevitable yan, tao lang. Even the textbooks have it, even with all the editors. So one of the mistakes, if you look at Fish of BRS, at least for the past editions, is that if you read it, okay, you're going to think that the micturition center is found in the midbrain. No, it's not. It's found in the pods. Okay? You can take a look at your Guyton, your Bern, even Wikipedia. It's at the pods. Pneumotoxic and apneusic centers, okay, they modify the output of your DRG. So they modify the DRG, increasing or decreasing the respiratory rate. Your pneumotoxic and apneusic centers, pneumotoxic will increase the respiratory rate. Mnemonic, think of pneumonia, mabilis ang paghinga. Apneusic center will decrease the respiratory rate. Apnea, mabagal ang paghinga, mnemonic. So these two, okay, the pneumotoxic and apneusic center will modify the output of your DRG. Hypothalamus is where you find the 5 Fs, feeding, fleeing, effing, okay, feeling, okay? The thalamus, its claim to fame is that it is a relay center for almost all sensations. Ano ibig sabihin nun, Doc? Lahat ng sensory pathways, whether somatic or special senses, all of them, with the exception of olfaction, will send fibers to the thalamus. So parang ang thalamus mo ang OG, ang ang godfather ng sensation. Kailangan magmano po ka muna sa kanya bago ka pumunta sa cortex, sa endpoint mo. Okay? All with the exception ng pasaway lang is the olfaction. Thalamus is also needed for memory recall. Okay? The brain has two hemispheres. Okay? Those hemispheres have 5 lobes each. What are those lobes? We have the frontal, we have the parietal, okay? We have the temporal, okay? Frontal, parietal, temporal, and we have the occipital, okay? The fifth one is called your limbic lobe. The limbic lobe is found, okay, at the limbus, the border of your frontal. Nandito siya sa ilalim. So the frontal lobe, okay, is responsible for motor movements. So motor cortex is found there. Personality, judgment, calculation, anything the higher order, okay, nasa frontal lobe. Okay? Memory, calculation, judgment, motor, okay? Frontal lobe. Okay? Parietal lobe, anything na sensation. Somatosensory cortex is found there. Previous board exam question. Occipital is for vision. Temporal is for hearing. And the limbic lobe, the one at below the frontal, this is the site for behavior, emotions, and motivation. Behavior, emotions, and motivation. We used to think that the seat of emotions is in the heart. That's why your Valentine's card is heart. Okay? And when you do the bayang magili in the morning, in an official event, you place your hand, okay, where the heart is. Because this is what we thought to be the seat of emotion during the Middle Ages. Of course, later on, we discovered that no, the seat of emotions is actually in the brain, to be more specific, in the limbic lobe. Okay, nandoon yung seat of emotions. So I used to joke with my students, sabi ko, in a few months, you're going to go to PICC for your oath taking. When the oath taking comes, okay, place your hand, not here in your chest, but place your hand in your head. Okay, just to show the entire world that you know your physiology, that the seat of emotions is in the brain and not in the heart. Okay? So that's it for ANS. Very detailed. Kailangan eh. Okay, favorite ang ANS sa med boards. Kindly go back to my yellow boxes. The small notes I placed in there. Okay? Naka-bold, naka-italicized. Those are the only parts that you should highlight. Okay? Make your lives easier. Thank you so much. The others, Module 2.2, 2.3, Module 2.4, will be discussed by Dr. Prince Rubio.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rubio, your friendly neighborhood IM resident. And today, I'll provide a lecture about the neural pathways of the body, including the higher cortical functions. As per usual, here's my outline. So we will first discuss the motor pathways, which will include the pyramidal tracts, extrapyramidal tracts, and the accessory motor system. Then we will head the discussion of the somatosensory pathways, which contain your splenothalamic tract and your dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway. We will also entertain the unique pathways of the special senses for vision, audition, and balance, and olfaction and taste. Lastly, we will discuss the higher cortical functions and include concepts about the brain, lesions, and their presentation. With that said, let's first define some important terms, which are usually a cause of common confusion among medical students. Let's properly differentiate the terms used for cluster of neurons and bundle of axons. The cluster of your neurons found in the CNS, which is composed for brain and spinal cord, refer to the nucleus, while those found at the peripheral nervous system is termed ganglion. Basta pag nasa CNS ang ating cluster of neurons, ang tawag sa kanya ay nucleus. Pero pag nasa labas ka na, ganglion ang tawag dyan. When the bundle of axons are located in the CNS, tract ang tawag sa kanila. Hence, we have the terms corticospinal tract, from the cortex to the spine. As you can see, the pathways of the axons are still within the CNS. Same goes with our spinothalamic tract and others. But the term nerve naman refers to bundle of axons located in the peripheral nervous system. So let's first discuss the motor system. Motor pathways are classified into two sets, the pyramidal and extrapyramidal tracts. They're named like this mainly because of their anatomic involvement. The pyramidal tracts originate from the pyramidal cells of Betz, hence the name, which are found in the cerebral cortex. On the other hand, hindi naman nagagaling yung ating mga extrapyramidal tracts sa ating cells of Betz. Therefore, ang tawag sa kanya ay extra, sa labas ng ating pyramidal cells. They originate at the level of the brainstem. Now, in terms of function, pyramidal is voluntary control, and you have a conscious effort to do an action, while extrapyramidal is mainly for muscle tone and posture. Ito yung mga bagay na hindi mo kailangan maging conscious about, kasi yung katawan mo is involuntarily processing your extrapyramidal tracts. Now, for the components, the pyramidal tracts can be composed of two: the corticobulbar tract, which ends at the brainstem, while the corticospinal tracts ends at the spinal cord. For the extrapyramidal tracts, we have the following: the rubrospinal tract, reticulospinal tract, your vestibulospinal tracts, and your tectospinal tract. Let's first bring our attention to the pyramidal tract. As mentioned, the pyramidal tracts have two main components: the corticospinal tract and corticobulbar tract. Take note of the etymology of the words. Dahil nauna ang cortico, referring to the cerebral cortex, the origin of the tract is from the primary motor cortex of the frontal lobe, specifically at the giant pyramidal cells of Betz of the pre-central gyrus. Sa may banda siya ng frontal lobe natin. Nagbabago lang sila sa endpoints ng tract natin. Corticospinal tract terminates at the level of the spine to execute voluntary movements of the body muscles, while the corticobulbar tract terminates at the level of the bulb. The bulb refers to the head and neck. It is responsible for the movement of the head and neck muscles. Now take note that execution of movement by the primary motor cortex is very crude and imperfect. It must coordinate with the premotor areas and supplementary motor area, mainly for planning. Okay, so at the same time, it also coordinates with the basal ganglia for fine-tuning of the movement along the way. So if the primary cortex executes the movement, the premotor area is involved in planning of the movement, while the basal ganglia and even the cerebellum fine-tunes the movement. So let's trace the pathway of the corticospinal tract. So starting from the first order neurons, we have the precentral gyrus, specifically your pyramidal cells of Betz. So dadaan siya sa ating corona radiata, will enter the posterior limb of your internal capsule and will be at the level of your pyramids. Okay? Dito sa bandang lower medulla. Okay, wherein 80% decussation occurs. Dahil dyan, nagkakaroon ka ng two parts of your corticospinal tract. 80% becomes the lateral corticospinal tract, which goes to the contralateral side to provide voluntary movement of the contralateral side kung saan nanggaling ating signal. While the rest na hindi nag-decussate, they become your anterior corticospinal tracts, which are the ones used to initiate voluntary movements of our axial muscles, yung sa ating body or trunk in the process. Eventually, the tract will terminate at the second order at the level of your anterior horn of your spinal cord. Eventually, magkakaroon ka dyan ng axons that will relay information to the different muscles of your body. So for the corticobulbar tract, as mentioned, it terminates at the nuclei of the cranial nerves in the brainstem. So it is responsible for the voluntary movement of the cranial nerves with motor function. So here's the list of your cranial nerves. And take note guys, hindi lahat sila ay may motor function. Sa totoo lang, only 3 of them do not have a motor component. Your olfactory nerve, optic nerve, and your vestibulocochlear nerve. They're mainly sensory in nature, but the rest have their own motor functions. So these nerves in yellow are part of the corticobulbar tract. Now we head to your extrapyramidal tracts. As mentioned earlier, extrapyramidal tracts are responsible for body posture and muscle tone that are involuntary in nature. Now, here is an image showing the extrapyramidal tracts, but please don't be overwhelmed, okay? Iisa-isahin natin sila for better understanding. So, here are your tracts in a table para masimple tayo. So, again, take note of the etymology of the different terminologies. Rubro, okay? It means it stems from the red nucleus, your rubrospinal tract. Red nucleus from the midbrain. And it ends at the spinal tract. Ang ginagawa niya is that it stimulates your flexor muscles and inhibits your extensor muscles. Ang kanyang main function actually is to have fine movements of the hands. So for this kind dito guys, take note that it has a more flexural posture. Ang kanyang gustong ipakita. So from a top-notch tweeter, back in 2021, sabi nila, nag-flex daw si Dr. Rubio. Okay, so nag-flex daw ako. The rubrospinal tract is mostly for a flexor na posture, okay, and the include of the fine movements of the hands. Now, your pontine reticulospinal tract or medial reticulospinal tract naman is paired with your lateral or medullary reticulospinal tract. Both of them are derived from the reticular formation, which are found both in the pons and medulla. Pero nagbabago sila in terms of their function. So ang ating pontine or medial is mostly stimulatory for both flexural muscles and your extensor muscles. While the medullary naman or lateral both inhibits the flexors and the extensors in the process. Now for my simple mnemonic here, take note of the position of your pons and your medulla. The pons is superior in medulla in terms of anatomy. Pons then medulla kapag brainstem ang usapan. Kung mas mataas ang ating pons, siya ay more for stimulation. Ganun mo siya iisipin. So, it stimulates both flexors and extensors in the process. Dahil ang medulla naman is lower or inferior to the pons in terms of anatomy, it is more inhibitory in function. So, for a simple mnemonic in this case. Ang ating tectospinal tract naman, tecto meaning galing sa tectum. Tectum is at the dorsal part of your midbrain, and it stems from your superior colliculus, one of the very prominent structures at the tectum of the midbrain. Ang ginagawa niya is to coordinate the head and eye movements in response to stimuli. For example, pumasok yung aking girlfriend sa right side, di ba? So titingin ako sa kanya. Okay, dahil nakita ko siya doon, siya aking stimulus bali, titingin ako sa kanya. Ang coordination na yun ay dahil sa ating tectospinal tract for coordination of head and eye movement. Okay? Now, kapag naman, ang usapan ay vestibulospinal tract, meron siyang dalawang tracts ulit. Ang medial again and ang lateral. Ang medial mo ay nanggaling sa medial vestibular nucleus mo. Very important siya, mainly for vestibular system for balance. So ginagawa niya, nire-regulate niya yung ating head and neck movement for gaze stabilization. Para stabilize siya, para balance siya bali. So basta may vestibular sa usapan, lagi siyang stabilization. Now, ang ating lateral naman, na vestibular spinal tract, comes from your lateral vestibular nucleus, still at the medulla. Ang ginagawa naman niya is for posture stabilization. It inhibits the flexors while it stimulates your extensors in the process. So siya ang ating natural antagonist ng ating rubrospinal tract. So in general, your extrapyramidal tracts are about fine-tuning your muscle posture and tone in the process. Now, what if you have a problem involving your rubrospinal tract? So you can have your decortication or your decerebration. Now, kapag ang ating problema ay decorticate rigidity, meaning naka-flex ang iyong mga muscles, naka-flex ang iyong kamay, naka-adapt ang iyong shoulders in the process, naka-internally rotate ang iyong mga paa, at naka-plantar flex ka. Kung papansinin mo, lahat sila ay towards the core or the heart of your body. The hand are flexed and pointing above. So it means that the lesion is actually above the midbrain. Above the midbrain ang ating lesion dito. That's our mnemonic for the corticate rigidity. So it's all in relation with your red nucleus, to be specific, which is found at the midbrain. Pag decerebrate naman ang ating rigidity, kung papansinin mo, you have an extensor posturing. Ang ibig sabihin niyan, the lesion is found at the red nucleus or below the red nucleus of your midbrain. And it has a worse prognosis. To be honest, your decerebrate rigidity confers a GCS score of M2, while your decorticate naman is M3. Decorticate M3 sa ating GCS scoring, while decerebrate naman is M2 in our GCS scoring. So when you compare the two, obviously, mas worse ang prognosis ng taong may decerebrate rigidity. Kasi the lesion is found at or below the midbrain. So kung below the midbrain siya, ikaw ay papunta na sa iyong medalla. Kung nasa medalla ka, remember, andun ang ating mga heart rate centers and your respiratory rate centers. So, delikado. Papunta ka na ng ating comatose state. Now we head to one of your accessory motor muscles. Rather, one of the accessory motor pathways involving your cerebellum. So the cerebellum, along with the basal ganglia, influence the output of your cerebral cortex in terms of motor function. It is primarily responsible for coordination and refining the motor movements. It has three functional divisions. Your vestibulocerebellum, or also known as your archicerebellum, which is involved in the control of balance and eye movements. Your pontocerebellum naman, or the neocerebellum, is for planning and initiation of movement, while the spinocerebellum, or also known as your paleocerebellum, is about synergy, which is about the control of the rate, force, range, and direction of movement. So guys, for a quick mnemonic here, ponto, planning, spino, synergy. Okay, take note of these important concepts. Now, the cerebellar cortex is where the electrical signal inputs are being relayed and are processed by the cerebellum. So, it is found at the other aspect of your cerebellum, and that's three distinct layers. And take note of their differences in terms of content. The granular layer is the innermost layer. It contains mainly your granule cells, the most abundant neuron in the cerebellum, Golgi type 2 cells, and glomeruli structures. Kung papansin nyo guys, lahat sila ay merong G sa kanilang initial letter. Granular, granule cells, Golgi type 2 cells, and glomeruli. Purkinje naman is found at the middle layer. Okay, it contains your Purkinje cells. Okay, this is the layer. Very narrow layer lang naman siya. Okay, it contains your Purkinje cells. While the molecular layer naman is the outermost or most superficial layer of your cerebellar cortex, which contains stellate and basket cells, dendrites of your Purkinje and Golgi type 2 cells, and parallel fibers, which are actually axons of your granule cells. We need to know these cells because they are the processors of the electrical signal input to the cerebellum. Sila yung nag-i-interpret ng data coming from the outside of the cerebellum, coming from different structures. Can be coming from the spinal cord or coming from your vestibular system. Kasi nga, it's all about your balance and coordination. That's the goal of your cerebellum. Now, there are two types of afferent or input fibers carrying information into the cerebellum: climbing fibers and mossy fibers. Climbing fibers originate from the inferior olive of the medulla and directly interacts with the Purkinje cells. And their main role is for motor learning. So for a quick mnemonic here, you climb the ladder as you learn in medicine. While mossy fibers naman stem from multiple centers in the brainstem and spinal cord, but they directly synapse with the granule cells and also interact indirectly with your Purkinje cells. These fibers are mainly important for motor planning, coordination, and proprioception. Now, there are also closer interactions between the cells of the cerebellar cortex. So here are the following. One, glomeruli structures are referred to specific arrangements of connections between mossy fibers and granule cells. On the other hand naman, parallel fibers refer to the axons of granule cells that excite multiple Purkinje cells and other cells. While your basket cells, stellate cells, and Golgi 2 cells are inhibitory interneurons. So in summary, these structures are responsible for processing the data coming from the afferent stimuli, coming from the different parts of the brain, going to the cerebellum. Now, after niya ma-interpret ng ating cerebellar cortex ang information, ilalabas niya ang information via the Purkinje cells. And they serve as the only cells involved in the output of the cerebellar cortex. They project inhibitory signals via the release of GABA to the cerebellar nuclei and vestibular nucleus for the tune-finding of the voluntary movements of your body and to regulate the rate and range and direction of your movements. Pero for me, ang mas testable dito guys are the different lesions of the cerebellum. And these are very testable. Coming from Guyton, we have the following. If you have a lesion of your flocculonodular lobe, okay, magkakaroon ka ng cerebellar nystagmus. Nystagmus is having rhythmic, involuntary movements of the eyes. Hypotonia or reduced muscle tension are seen in the involvement of your deep cerebellar nuclei, which is composed of your dentate, emboliform, globose, and fastigial nuclei. When the cerebellar vermis is affected, it will cause truncal ataxia, meaning meron kang ataxia mainly of your trunk, sa axial part ng body mo. And your cerebellar hemisphere lesions present with ipsilateral features of intentional tremors, dysdiadochokinesia, which refers to the impaired ability to perform rapidly alternating movements, and falling toward the side of the lesion. Guys, take note that when the lesions are involved in the cerebellum, they present on the ipsilateral side, while lesions of the corticospinal tract occurring distal to the site of the causation present on the contralateral side. Okay? Clear so far? I hope you're not too overwhelmed. Now we head to your basal ganglial system, also one of your accessory motor systems. Now, while the cerebellum is mainly involved in movement coordination and refining motor commands, the basal ganglia play a role in motor planning and initiation of smooth movements, as well as other cognitive and emotional functions. They are located within the cerebral hemispheres and include the following nuclei: caudate nucleus, putamen, globus pallidus, substantia nigra, and your subthalamic nucleus. Now, two opposing pathways exist between the basal ganglia and the thalamus and cerebral cortex. Your direct and indirect pathways. Now guys, medyo nakakatakot siya aralin, but to simplify things and for your board exams, you must know at least the general trends in these pathways. Okay? So huwag kabahan masyado. Overall, the direct pathway is excitatory, while the indirect pathway is inhibitory in nature. Dopamine is the major transmitter involved in the basal ganglial pathways, okay, among others. And it is excitatory when coupled with the D1 receptors of the direct pathway, while inhibitory in nature when it interacts with the D2 receptors of the indirect pathway. These interactions would then affect the control of movement initiated by the cerebral cortex. However, the more testable concept concerning this would be the lesions of the basal ganglia. Globus pallidus, when you have a lesion here, magkakaroon ka ng atetosis or writing movements of your hands, arms, neck, and face. So para siyang slow movements na ating kamay usually. In subthalamic nuclei problem, in the subthalamus, you can have hemibalismus, sudden flailing movements of an entire limb. If you have a subthalamic nuclei lesion, you will have hemibalismus. Okay, take note of that visual mnemonic, okay? If the putamen naman is involved, para meron kang flicking movements ng konti of the hands, face, and body, parang dancing movement siya. If you have substantia nigra involvement, it can cause Parkinsonism, wherein you'll have a trap presentation, having rest tremors, meaning habang nakarest ka, nagkakaroon ka ng tremors. Okay, you have rigidity. Okay, you have akinesia and you have postural instability. Take note of this trap mnemonic as features of Parkinson disease. And lastly, if the striatum is involved, which is composed of your caudate nucleus and putamen, okay, it can cause your Huntington disease, wherein it can present as chorea and neurodegeneration. So what happens in Huntington is actually there is an autosomal dominant trinucleotide CAG repeat expansion in the Huntington gene on the chromosome 4, leading to atrophy of the caudate nucleus and putamen, leading to chorea and neurodegeneration. Okay, so simple lang guys, take note of these lesions involved in the basal ganglia. They're very testable for the PLE. Now, we're done with your motor systems. We'll head to your sensory systems. And it is a very important system since it gives you information about the state of the body and the immediate environment. They are divided into two sets, the somatosensory pathways and your special senses. But we'll first discuss here your somatosensation of the body. So your sensory receptors in general can detect external stimuli, may it be in the form of a chemical stimulus, mechanical form, or even electromagnetic form. Okay, in this case, we have your light. And as mentioned, it will also sense problems inside your body. So pain is also detected by the system. So when these receptors are activated by the aforementioned stimuli, there will be an opening of ion channels leading to a flow of current that will usually lead to depolarization para magkaroon ka ng receptor or generator potential. But take note that hyperpolarization is the one that causing receptor potential in the visual pathway, not depolarization. So take note of this ADMAN out. Now, your receptor generator potential is not a true action potential. Faker siya. Kasi it only merely brings you closer to the threshold. Okay, in contrast, your action potential goes way beyond your threshold once activated. But your receptor potential only brings it closer to the threshold but not becoming a true action potential. Same siya with the concept of your slow waves, which are discussed in GI module. They're also not true action potentials. They only bring you towards to the threshold but not going through it. Now, receptors are best defined in terms of adaptation and receptive fields. Adaptation refers to the response to a prolonged or sequential stimulus. Adapt means manhid, to be non-responsive to the stimuli. So we have here your slow adapting receptors or tonic receptors, which detect a steady stimulus, while rapidly adapting receptors or phasic receptors detects the onset and offset of a stimulus. So basically, you have your two types of receptors. Mga martyr siya, mga players. Slow adapting receptors are mga martir. As long as you love them kahit konti lang, they will love you back. As long as may stimulus ka, may response pa rin yung ating mga slow adapting receptors. Matagal silang mag-adapt, matagal silang maging manhid. In contrast, your rapidly adapting receptors are players. Okay, dahil mabilisan lang, ang dali nilang magsawa. Ang dali nilang maging manhid. Madali silang mag-adapt. Kahit mahal mo pa sila, hindi ka na nila mahal. So face that reality. Okay? Kahit may stimulus pa, wala ng response yung iyong sensory receptors from that kind of stimulus. They only enjoy the start and end of your relationships. They only detect the onset and offset of the stimulus. So yan, as you can see here guys, dito in your slowly adapting receptors, meron kang response to a prolonged or continuous na stimulus. But in the rapidly adapting receptors, meron kang on and off. Okay, parang ano yan, slow kind of love and fast kind of love. Ang slow kind of love mo, nurtured siya, naaalagaan over time. Bago mawala yung love, di ba? And hopefully, infinity na, di ba? Pero ang ating mga rapid adapting receptors, sila ay mabilisan lang. Okay, hindi na alagaan eh. So parang bago, then bago ulit pagkatapos. Okay, that is your difference between your adaptation, quality of receptors. And of course, we have your receptor fields. They refer to the skin region controlled by the specific neuron. And you have two types, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 refers to a smaller area, pero very well defined siya dito. Okay, very well defined yung kanyang area involved. But in type 2, you have a wider area, for example, the whole finger, pero poorly defined yung kanyang sensation. So that's the main difference. Now, in terms of your cutaneous mechanoreceptors, we have the following. Okay, Meister, Pacinian, Merkel, and Ruffini. Pag ang usapan ay fastly adapting receptors, we have your Meissner and Pacinian. Nag-iiba lang sila in terms of their types of receptors, field. Type 1 lang ating Meissner, while Pacinian is type 2. Ang Meissner in general, detect low frequency or slow vibrations. While Pacinian purposes naman detect high frequency or fast vibrations. And of course, they detect pressure in the process. Pag ang usapan naman ay yung mga slowly adapting na receptor, yung mga pangmatagalan, you have your Merkel disc and your Ruffini corpuscles. Type 1 field ang ating Merkel, while type 2 ang ating Ruffini. To be specific, your Merkel functions for detection of texture and touch localization. While Ruffini naman is for detection of sustained or steady pressure. Now, here are the rest of your cutaneous mechanoreceptors. You also have your hair end organs and free nerve endings, which are very prominent in hairy skin. Hair end organs detect movement of object on the skin, while free nerve endings detect pain, temperature, and crude touch in the process. But hindi lang po skin ang ating merong mechanoreceptors. We also have your muscle sensors. So we have your muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs. Now, these muscle sensors, they're activated when they are stretched in the process. So let's first talk about your muscle spindles. Now, for terminology, extrafusal fibers refer to your usual skeletal muscle fibers. Okay, check yan. Now, your muscle spindles, which are also found at the belly of your muscle, they are termed as your intrafusal fibers. So, ano nangyayari? Kailan sila na-activate? Now, kapag ang iyong muscle ay nag-relax, what happens to the muscle belly? It will daw lengthen. Pag humaba siya, okay, ang mangyayari, the muscle spindles will detect this change kasi it is stretched in the process. Therefore, your muscle spindles detect muscle length. Take note guys, it is activated when the muscle relaxes, when the muscle belly is stretched, okay? For a quick mnemonic, spindle length, okay? While the Golgi tendon organs naman are found at the polar ends of your muscle. To be specific, at the tendons. Tendons attaching your muscles to the bones. Now, kailan sila na-activate? Kapag nag-contract ang ating muscle. When the muscle belly contracts, nasa-stretch ang ating tendons in the process. Therefore, it can detect muscle tension. and they're activated when the muscle contracts. For a quick mnemonic, Golgi tendon organs detect tension. Tendon sounds like tension. Now you also have passion corpus cells in your muscle areas. We have here para mag-detect sila ng vibrations. And you still have your free nerve endings to detect pain in the process. Now, after you have your sensory receptors, they will relay the information towards your sensory nerve fibers. And here is a list containing your types of sensory nerve fibers. Okay? Now, depende yan sa ating typology. Pag ang usapan ay general fiber type, we have here your A-alpha, A-beta, A-delta, A-gamma, B and C terminology. Pero pag ang usapan ay sensory fiber type, ang pag-uusapan ay 1A, 1B, 2, 3, and 4. Iba ang kanilang terminologies. And take note of the different types of modalities being relayed by these sensory nerve fibers. It's actually testable in the PLE. But in terms of lecturing this, what I would like you to know here is their differences. Okay, yung ating mga A-alpha, they are the largest in diameter and they have the fastest conduction velocity. Now, what governs conduction velocity of your nerve fibers? Dalawa lang yan. One is myelination. If you are more myelinated, you have more saltatory conductions. Therefore, you have a faster conduction velocity. Pangalawa, ang kapal ng mga nerve fibers. The more na makapal ang ating nerve fibers, the more na konti ang ating internal resistance. Therefore, faster ang ating conduction velocity. So type A fibers are thicker, more myelinated, therefore you have a faster conduction velocity. In contrast to your type C fibers, the ones involved in pain, temperature, they are unmyelinated. And nipis ang kanilang diameter. So if manipis ang yung diameter, you have high resistance inside the nerve fiber. So babagal ka. And if wala kang myelination, mas mabagal ka kasi wala kang saltatory conduction in the process. So you have to master that trend. Okay? Now, how do we relay the information from the sensory fibers going to your cerebral cortex? So here are your ascending pathways or your somatosensory pathways. We have your dorsal column, medial lemniscus pathway, and your spinothalamic tract, also known as your anterolateral tract. Now, pag ang usapan ay fidelity, okay, the dorsal column is mainly for temporal and spatial fidelity. It is mainly because they are governed by type 2 fibers, which are large myelinated fibers. In contrast, your spinothalamic tract is less fidelity. Kasi ang involved dyan ay type 3 and type 4. So mabagal ang kanilang mga conduction velocity. Therefore, mabagal ang kanilang response and kung mapansinin mo, hindi ganun ka-fine-tune yung kanilang quality. They also differ in terms of their decussation. The DCML decussates near or at the level of the medulla. Almost the same with your corticospinal tract, right? But your spinothalamic tract, nagkakaiba siya. It decussates immediately within the same spinal level. Tapos, of course, iba yung kanilang modalities. Since mas fine-tuning yung ating mga modalities for the DCML, it's mainly involved in fine touch, proprioception, which involve your position sensing, and even your two-point discrimination. We also have your vibration and pressure. Pero ang ating spinothalamic tract, it has two tracts involved. The anterior tract is involved in crude touch and pressure. Crude touch is also known as light touch. And kasama dyan ang ating tickling and sexual stimuli. While the lateral tract is involved in relaying pain information and temperature going to the cerebral cortex. But in general, they enjoy the same kind of pathway. So from the somatosensory receptors, okay, going to the fibers, they relay the information first to the dorsal root ganglion or the cranial nerve ganglion involved. Tapos, binibigay nila yan next to your second order of neurons, the ones found in the spinal cord and brainstem. Then, pupunta naman yan sa ating decussation process. Ganun yung kanyang processing hito. Bago siya pumuna sa ating thalamus. Thalamus is the one governing the entrance of your signals coming from the rest of the body going to the cerebral cortex. Siya yung nagbabantay dyan. Okay? And the thalamus accepts different kind of information depending on the nucleus involved. More on that on the next slide. But ultimately, pupunta ang ating somatosensory pathway information to your primary somatosensory cortex at the post-central gyrus of your parietal lobe. Para ma-interpret mo yung ating information given by your somatosensory receptors. Now, here are the important nuclei of the thalamus, many involved in somatosensation. Your VPL is involved in your spinothalamic tract and your DCML and will lead to your parietal lobe, mainly sa iyong primary somatosensory cortex. Ang VPM mo naman, nire-relay niya ang ating trigeminal pathway and gustatory pathway, the one na galing sa ating muka. Tingnan guys VPM, you put makeup on the face or M for mukha. Doon ang gagaling information niya at binibigay niya yun sa ating parietal lobe. Now, more on this later para sa ating visual pathway and auditory pathway, pero take na lang guys muna na ang ating LGN is the one that relays visual information to your primary visual cortex at the occipital lobe. L for light, while the medial geniculate nucleus naman relays auditory information going to your primary auditory cortex of the temporal lobe. L for light, while M for music. And of course, your ventrolateral naman relays information from the cerebellum and basal ganglia going to the primary motor cortex to feed them for the fine-tuned movements of your voluntary actions. Diba? Simple lang, diba, right? So now we head to your special senses. So for a trigger question, again, what special sense pathway requires hyperpolarization for generation of your action potential ultimately? It is your visual pathway. Because in general, your depolarization is the one that creates your action potential along the track. But kakaiba ang ating visual pathway. It is the one na involve ang ating hyperpolarization. So let's talk about here the visual pathway. This begins with your photoreception, which is involved in the conversion of your light stimulus or electromagnetic radiation waves into electrical signals that would be relayed along the visual pathway to the primary visual cortex of our occipital lobe. Now, two types of cells are involved in this process, the rods and the cones. Rods are sensitive to your low-intensity light. Okay, so they are important mainly for night vision, while cones naman are the ones involved in high-intensity light, involved in color vision. So for a quick mnemonic, guys, cones, color vision siya. Now, the rods are not present in the fovea. Fovea is the site of highest visual acuity in the retina, but they are found in high concentration in the parafoveal region. Okay, it refers to the area surrounding to your fovea centralis. While cones are present mainly in the fovea centralis, the area of highest visual acuity. But take note that there is an area of the retina without rods and cones, and this is your optic disc. If there are no rods and cones, therefore there is no image detected in this portion. No rods and cones means that wala ka kasi doong mga receptors kasi doon dumadaan ang axons ng ating ganglion cells and doon sila nag-exit out of the retina to form your optic nerve. Therefore, the optic disc is the blind spot of the retina. As mentioned, the goal of photoreception is to convert light stimuli into electrical signals. Here are the steps involved, and you have to at least familiarize yourself with these steps. But what are the pearls in this pathway? One, take note that vitamin A is important in photoreception, causing blindness, okay, that is acquired worldwide pag you have vitamin A deficiency. More on that in biochemistry. And two, take note that your metarhodopsin 2 is the one that causes your activation of transducin, which will eventually lead to your hyperpolarization. And as mentioned, guys, in my trigger question, the visual pathway requires hyperpolarization for the generation of action potential in this pathway. The rest of the special senses require depolarization. Once light energy is converted to chemical energy, the transmission of signals is then relayed into your bipolar cells, which serve as interneurons. Kaya sila bipolar because the shape of the cell shows two poles. Para siyang ganito. Yan. Meron siyang dalawang poles dito. One connecting to your photoreceptor cells, yung isa naman going to your ganglion cells. Moreover, guys, bipolar cells are known to be contrast detectors. They detect contrast in the image. Now, eventually, the signals will be relayed to the ganglion cells of your retina. And these cells are the ones that will form our optic nerve. Take note, guys, ha? Ganglion cells are the ones that will form your optic nerve. Now, the optic nerve is found at the peripheral nervous system pa rin. Kaya nerve ang tawag sa kanya. The optic nerve will then relay the transmission to the optic chiasm. The optic chiasm is the location wherein roughly 50% of nerve fibers are decusated to the contralateral side. But before that, let's orient first ourselves. The image that hits the retina is inverted upside down and left to right. This is due to the biconvexity of the lens. Okay, so laging inverted ang ating image, upside down and left to right. Okay, beyond the optic chiasm. So dito guys, as you reach the optic chiasm, the nasal retina fibers of around 50% are decusated to the contralateral visual pathway. Okay? As a result, guys, the left half of the visual field rather from each eye is processed in the right hemisphere of the brain. And the right half of the visual field from each eye is processed in the left hemisphere of the brain. Now, after crossing the optic chiasm, the nerve fibers continue along the optic tracts. This time, tracts ka na kasi you're now part of the central nervous system. Take note of the terminologies involved, okay? Then tracts carry visual information to the lateral geniculate nucleus of your thalamus. Again, guys, L for light. From the LGN, the visual signals are then divided into two sets of geniculocalcarine tracts, also known as your optic radiations. Dalawa sila. You have here your superior optic radiation and inferior optic radiation, also known as your Mayer's loop. The superior optic radiation travels in the parietal lobe, while the inferior optic radiation or Mayer's loop travels in the temporal lobe. Thus, damage of the parietal lobe may affect the superior optic radiation, and this likewise occurs in the temporal lobe. Pag temporal lobe naman, ang nadadamage naman ng ating Mayer's loop or inferior optic radiation. Eventually, the visual information of the optic radiations are then relayed to the primary visual cortex at the calcarine fissure of the occipital lobe, where visual information is processed and interpreted. Now, let's talk about the defects of the visual pathway. If the right optic nerve, as you can see here, guys, is transected, there will be a total loss of vision in the right eye. And it makes sense because this optic nerve transmits signals prior to the optic chiasm. Wala ka pang decussation na nangyayari. Now, pathology of the optic chiasm at the center will lead to bitemporal hemianopsia. This occurs because only the nasal retinal fibers decussate, and the temporal fibers are not affected. Kaya, nangyayari, you have a bitemporal hemianopsia. And this is a testable concept. And to be honest, maybe the pathology that can be asked in the exam among all visual pathway defects. On a clinical standpoint, this is also an important sign of a pituitary mass or a hypothalamus mass. True enough, my younger sister had craniopharyngioma back then, and she had bitemporal hemianopsia as one of her initial symptoms, along with headache. Thankfully, tatanggal na yung mask, and my sister has recovered back then when the mask was removed back in grade 4 and is currently working her way to be a certified public accountant. Okay? Now, if the right optic tract, as you can see here, is actually damaged, it will lead to a left homonymous hemianopsia. Homonymous hemianopsia. So beyond the optic chiasm, ang rule of thumb dyan ay parating inverted na ang ating visual defect. And lagi siyang homonymous. Yan ang term na ang ibig sabihin ay both eyes have the same affected lesion. Pareho silang left na hemianopsia. Homonymous sila. Now, if the right Mayer's loop, as you can see here, guys, or the inferior right optic radiation is damaged, then the lesion will be a superior left homonymous quadrantonopia. It makes sense. Tama? Kasi the lesion is now beyond the optic chiasm. And the lesion is always the reverse for both left to right and superior to inferior. But take note that there's a different phenomenon occurring when the calcarine fissure of the occipital lobe is affected. There's always macular sparing involved. Okay, bakit? Kasi this is due to the watershed effect occurring in the occipital lobe since it is supplied by both the posterior and middle cerebral arteries. Okay, so let's practice muna ng konti. So what is the pathology? When the right optic nerve is involved, it will lead to a total vision loss in the right eye. This is because the pathology is found anterior to the optic chiasm and no decussation yet has occurred coming from the eye going to the cerebral cortex. So what is the pathology when the right geniculo-calcarine tract is involved? The whole tract itself, not only the superior and inferior, both of them are involved. Take note that the lesion is now beyond the optic chiasm. Hence, ang tama ay right becomes left, reverse ang ating pathology. So, lesion of the right geniculo-calcarine tract leads to a left homonymous hemianopsia. Right becomes left in the process. What if naman pathology of the right inferior calcarine fissure? Again, the lesion is now beyond the optic chiasm. Hence, right becomes left and superior becomes inferior. Reverse na yung ating pathology. So the answer here is your left superior homonymous quadrantonopia. Right inferior fissure, pag may lesion dyan, becomes your left superior homonymous quadrantonopia. Right becomes left, inferior becomes superior in terms of terminology. But is this answer enough? No. Since this involves the calcarine fissure of the occipital lobe, there should be macular sparing in your answer. So this is the correct answer for your right inferior calcarine fissure visual defect. Now we head to your auditory pathway. So hearing can be defined by the following in terms of sound frequency, okay, which is actually related to pitch measured in hertz. So, ang frequency na narinig ng ating human ear ay from 20 to 20,000 hertz. Napaka-testable niyan. Don't forget that. Okay? And sound can also be defined by intensity or pressure, which is correlated with amplitude or loudness measured in decibels. Usually, ang ating conversational speech ay 60 decibels lang. Pag beyond 85 siya, it can now lead to occupational hearing loss definition. Pero kapag more than 120 siya, it can trigger your attenuation reflex. This reflex involves your middle ear bones. Okay, it's the protective response of the middle ear to your loud sounds, causing your attenuation reflex. Now, what are the parts of your ear as introduction? So the outer ears mainly for localization and collection. The pinna and your EAC is here. They basically collect sound and deliver it to your tympanic membrane. Now, the middle ear will now contain your ossicles and which are your malleus, incus, and stapes. And they insert to the oval window here, the membrane between the middle ear and the inner ear. The middle ear is basically here for impedance matching, wherein the sound from the outer ear, is being matched to the sound in the inner ear fluid. That is the role of your middle ear bones or ossicles. Again, lastly, we have your inner ear naman, which is the site of your signal transduction. Again, the transduction involves the conversion of energy or stimuli into electrical stimulus. In this case, the mechanical energy of sound is being converted into electrical signals. Now, let's first orient ourselves in terms of the anatomy of the inner ear. We have two parts, a bony labyrinth, the outer part, and the membranous labyrinth, the inner part. The bony labyrinth contains the cochlea, the semicircular canals, and the vestibule. It's a very bony labyrinth. Sa loob niya, meron kang sac of fluid, referred to as your membranous labyrinth. Again, guys, the bony case is the outer part, while the membranous is found inside. Now, when sound waves enter the cochlea through the oval window, they create vibrations in the fluid-filled chamber. These vibrations travel along the basilar membrane, the one in white here is the basilar membrane, okay, which varies in thickness and stiffness, allowing it to detect different frequencies of sound in the process. The movement of the basilar membrane bends your hair cells, more on that later, generating electrical signals to travel to the auditory nerve to the brain. The brain then processes the signals, enabling us to perceive and understand the sounds we hear. Basically, the cochlea has a remarkable mechanism showcasing the intricate process by which sound waves are transformed into meaningful auditory information. So here's the anatomy of your inner ear, specifically the cross-section of the cochlea. As you can see, you have here three main compartments: scala vestibuli, scala media, and the scala tympani. For simplification, guys, scala media is your major cochlear duct and contains endolymph, which is high in potassium. Endolymph is found in the middle, media. The media, sa gitna, it contains the endolymph, the one high in potassium. While the perilymph is found in the scala vestibuli and the scala tympani, which are high in sodium. Take note that the scala media contains your tectorial membrane, which is adjacent to your basilar membrane. In between these membranes, we have your different hair cells. We have here the inner hair cell, and the outer hair cells are these three cells here in the image. Now, para ma-maintain ang ating high in potassium ng ating endolymph, we need to have your stria vascularis. Okay, guys, take note of this concept and please include it in your handout, okay? Yung mga concepts na wala sa handout nyo, please write them down. The stria vascularis is highly vascular component of the cochlear duct, which is responsible for the secretion and maintenance of the endolymph composition. Thus, it is related to the generation of your endocochlear potential. Okay, the difference between the endolymph and the perilymph. You have here your potential. And that endocochlear potential contributes to the proper functioning of your auditory system, signaling in the inner ear. So very important na ma-maintain yun ng ating stria vascularis. That is the organ involved in this kind of phenomenon. Now let's orient ourselves again with your hair cells. As mentioned, they're the ones found between the tectorial membrane and your basilar membrane. The inner hair cells are the primary sensory receptors for hearing. Yan, sa gitna. They convert sound vibrations into electrical signals. While the outer hair cells, these three, play a supportive role by amplifying and fine-tuning the mechanical responses to different frequencies, contributing to the cochlea's remarkable sensitivity and selectivity in processing auditory information. Guys, take note of these differences and please write them down in your handout. Okay, inner hair cells po ang involved in signal transduction. Supporting role lang basically ang ating mga outer hair cells for clarification. Now, sound waves cause cochlea to vibrate in the process. Now, the cilia on the inner hair cells bend by shearing force, since basilar membrane is stiffer than your tectorial membrane. And this causes the polarization of your inner hair cells, the ones involved in signal transduction. Ang nangyari dyan, the potassium in the endolymph goes inside the inner hair cells, causing the polarization of these inner hair cells. Now, basically, guys, the oscillation of the inner hair cells, which compose of the bending of the cilia, will eventually lead to cochlear microphonic potential. What is happening here, guys? So when the cilia bends in one direction, it causes depolarization, and the opposite causes hyperpolarization. Yung pag-oscillate na yan ng ating inner hair cells, that will create a cochlear microphonic potential and lead to stimulation of your auditory system. Now, it is also important to know your place theory of hearing. This suggests that the perception of pitch is determined by the specific location on the basilar membrane where the maximum vibration occurs in response to frequencies of sound. Okay, guys, this is your place theory of hearing. You talk about here the basilar membrane orientation. This white structure surrounding your cochlear duct or your stria mid or your media rather. Okay, your scala media. That is your basilar membrane. Yung makita na basilar membrane near the oval and round window, that is the base of the basilar apparatus. Well, the basilar membrane found near the helicotrema is your apex. Okay? Refers to the apex. Now, you have to differentiate them because the base responds to high frequency sounds. While the apex, the one near the helicotrema, itong part na to, they respond to low frequency sounds. Okay? My mnemonic here, guys, sometimes can be lonely at the tops or at the apex. So guys, don't forget your friends and don't burn all your bridges when you're at the top na. Pag sobrang sikat ka na, ha? Huwag makalimut, basically. Now, important siya, guys, mainly because of your presbycusis. Kapag tumatanda ka na, magkakaroon ka ng loss of high-frequency hearing. It is basically due to the loss of your inner hair cells at the base of the cochlea. Remember, at the base of the cochlea, pinagamit sila for high-frequency sound detection. If nawala mga inner hair cells mo dyan, magkakaroon ka ng high-frequency hearing loss, causing your presbycusis. Now, how does the auditory pathway is involved beyond your auditory nerve? Okay, you please take them down in your handout. So, from the nerve, ipapasa ang signals to your bipolar cells of your spiral ganglion. Ipapasa naman siya to your dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei, which are found between the pons and medulla. Third, they are now relayed to your superior olivary nucleus of your pons, going to your fourth order, your inferior colliculus, found at the midbrain. And fifth, they are related to your medial geniculate nucleus of your thalamus. Again, guys, music, music. Okay, medial geniculate nucleus. Finally, information is relayed going to your sixth order, your primary auditory cortex of your temporal lobe. Now we go to your vestibular pathway, mainly for balance and coordination. So the system allows reflex adjustments of the head, eyes, and postural muscles to provide stable visual image and steady posture. It consists of 3 perpendicular semicircular canals that mainly detect angular acceleration, while your 2 otolite organs, your utricle and subcule, detects linear acceleration. So guys, pag ang usapan ay semicircular canals, they detect angular acceleration. Pero pag utricle and subcule, it's always linear acceleration. Utricle detects horizontal acceleration, while subcule detects vertical acceleration. Guys, for a quick recall, think of a UV express accelerating horizontally in EDSA. UV express, utricle, horizontal acceleration. Okay? As you can see here, guys, here is an image containing your vestibular organ, and your vestibular organ contains endolymph, and the vestibular organ itself is surrounded by perilymph. Okay? And take note of the important parts of involved in the angular acceleration. We have here again hair cells. Again, as you can see, but they have here a kinocilium. Kinocilium is the single long cilium of a hair cell, while sterocilia are smaller cilia of the hair cell. Now, what happens in the transduction of angular acceleration information? Dahil nasa tubig ang ating mga hair cells, they respond well with the movement of your head. Now, during head movement, when the sterocilia is bending towards the kinocilium, as you can see here, you will have here a depolarization effect. Okay? While the sterocilia naman bending away from the kinocilium, as you can see in the image here, nagkakaroon ka ng hyperpolarization. Now, where your head turns is where the polarization happens. Okay? When I turn my head here, papunta dito ang aking depolarization. Now, in the opposite direction naman, hyperpolarization happens. You turn your head to the right, and the sterocilia bends towards the kinocilium, thus the polarization happens on the right ear. Claro? Claro. Okay? So that's the basic concepts in your angular acceleration involved in the vestibular system. Now, for a second theory question in this section, special sensory pathways pass through the thalamus before going to the cerebral cortex except for the olfactory pathway, the odd man out. So kung papansinin mo guys, lahat sila dumadaan sa thalamus except for olfaction. And again guys, thalamus is the major release center for all ascending sensory information except for this pathway, olfaction pathway. Now discuss here the olfactory pathway. Let's first orient ourselves with the structures involved. We have the olfactory epithelium containing your olfactory receptor cells. And these cells are true neurons. Neurons talaga sila dito. Meron na sila mga extension para makakuha ng mga odorants sa ating ilong. This is the cribriform plate. As you can see here, may mga butas sila dito para mag-interact tayo with our mitral cells of our olfactory bulb. And beyond this bulb, ang tawag na ito ay olfactory tract na. So nerves muna, olfactory bulb, then olfactory tract after. So for the first order neurons, again, these are your true nucleus dito. We have here your olfactory receptor cells. Guys, please write them down in your handout, your olfactory pathway. Next, this will be relayed to your olfactory nerve. Ito yun. Pupunta to the mitral cells of your olfactory bulb. Dahil nasa loob ka na ng CNS already, pagka na ba sa bulb, ang tawag dyan ay olfactory tract na. And it will go to the third order neuron found in the olfactory cortex of your temporal lobe. Now, meron ka ng tinatawag na entorhinal cortex. And this cortex is in close association with the olfactory cortex. It mainly involves in olfactory memory. So please write them down in your handout. So in case of a trauma, and there is a fracture or damage of the cribriform plate, kunwari nasira siya. Kasi in trauma, pwedeng matama parati ang ating cribriform plate. Mahina siya, very weak kasi it's a very porous structure. Anong nangyari? You will have anosmia, wherein you cannot smell scent. But you can still smell ammonia because ammonia is detected by your trigeminal nerve or CN5 because ammonia is seen as a noxious stimuli. So guys, the olfactory nerve is the one detecting odorant molecules, relaying scent. while the trigeminal nerve, or CN5, detects noxious or painful stimuli, and one of them is ammonia. Now we head to your gustatory pathway, last in our special senses modality. According to Bernard-Levy, which is regarded as the sixth taste, it is fatty. So guys, let's orient again your structures here in the gustatory pathway. We have here your sulcus terminalis. This sulcus terminalis is found posterior to your valid papillae, and they represent the embryonic division between the anterior 2/3 and the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. Take note here, guys, that the facial nerve CN7 via the chorda tympani detects taste at the anterior at the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, while the posterior 1/3 detects taste via the glossopharyngeal nerve, while the back of the throat and epiglottis can detect gustatory molecules via the vagus nerve. Now, same set of cranial nerves detect somatosensation of the tongue, except for the anterior 2/3, wherein CNV3 po, or the mandibular nerve of your trigeminal nerve, detects somatosensation of your anterior 2/3. Sa ating posterior 2/3, still your CN9. Sa back ng throat, sensation is detected by your vagus nerve or CN10. So if, for example, maglalagay ako ng sugar sa aking anterior 2/3 ng tongue ko, ang CN7 ang aking ma-activate. Pero if mapapasa ang dila ko habang uminom ng kape, the CN53 or V3 will be affected instead. Kasi nga iba sila ng involvement in terms of somatosensation and taste modality. Okay? Dito guys CN7 via the chorda tympani nerve is involved in the sensation of taste in the anterior 2/3 of your tongue. Now, unlike the olfactory receptors, the gustatory receptors are not neurons. They are only extension of the nuclei of your cranial nerves 7, 9, and 10. Okay? Take note of this concept. Okay? And please write them down in your handout. Eventually, signals will then be relayed to the second order of your solitary nucleus found at the medulla oblongata. And finally, this will be relayed to the ventral posteromedial nucleus of your thalamus. Again, guys, gustation, gustatory pathway, M. M, make up. You put it on your face, diba? Remember, the gustatory pathway is being relayed to the cortex via the VPM of your thalamus. And lastly, bibigyan niya ito ating insula. Because the insula contains your gustatory cortex for final interpretation. Now, the different modalities here, sweet, umami, salty, sour, and bitter, na-activate sila depending on the involved molecules. Again, these are found in your handout naman, so okay lang yan. Okay, kailangan glucose para maging sweet, obviously. Glutamic acid, okay? For umami, sodium, of course, obviously salty, sour, acids, diba? Yung mga citric acid natin coming from oranges. And alkaloids naman present a bitter taste. Now we head to your higher cortical functions and temperature control. Let's first discuss here sleep. Okay, so in this question, guys, what is the predominant brainwave seen during REM sleep? It's your beta waves. Now, sleep is an active process. It is not a passive process. Okay, gumagana pa rin ang katawan mo kahit ikaw itulog. Actually, marami nangyayari while you are sleeping. It is crucial for maintaining physical health, cognition, and emotional well-being and overall vitality. The sleep cycle consists of multiple cycles of NREM sleep and REM sleep throughout the night. Non-rapidly eye-moving sleep and rapidly eye-moving sleep. Now, sleep cycle begins with NREM sleep. And as sleep progresses from stage 1 to 4, mas lalo kang nakapupunta sa deep sleep before going to REM sleep. Now, during REM sleeping, dreams are usually activated. We have active dreaming in REM sleep. Pero nangyari sa kanya. Usually, dreamless ang ating non-REM. Or if meron kang dreams siya, usually hindi mo sila naaalala. So if meron kang dream tapos di mo siya naaalala, highly likely nasa non-REM sleep na phase siya. In terms of function, your non-REM sleep mainly is for physical restoration and relaxation. Dito parang mas angat ang iyong parasympathetic state. You have GI motility, you have decrease in BP, heart rate, and RR. You have decrease in muscle activity but you are not paralyzed. While in REM sleep, you have rapid eye movements. Kaya siya tinatawag na paradoxical sleep kasi you have rapid eye movements kahit tulog ka. Tapos, kung papansin mo, despite having muscle atonia in REM sleep, very erratic pa rin ang iyong hemodynamic status. You can have irregular BP, irregular heart rate, and irregular RR during REM sleep. Kaya siya paradoxical sleep. Para kang hindi tulog. Parang gising ang iyong katawan. Now, REM sleep occurs every 90 minutes of sleep. And that is the rationale why bakit kailangan meron kang 90 minutes of sleep for nap time. Para pagkatapos, hindi ka parang antukin or groggy. Okay? Kasi ang goal dyan, kailangan meron kang 90 minutes of sleep para natapos ng goal sleep cycle. Okay? Para nakapag-restore properly ang iyong functioning. Unlike kapag nag-power nap ka ng 15 to 30 minutes, pagising mo parang groggy ka, parang di enough, di ba? Kasi hindi ka pa nakakapag-full one cycle ng sleep mo. Kaya kapag yung girlfriend ko ay nagpapasabi na gisingin siya after 30 minutes, naku, hindi ko siya ginigising after 30 minutes. Kasi for sure, aaway tatarayan niya ako in the process. So instead, I rather sleep for full 90 minutes. So thank you, physiology, lifesaver ka. Okay? So, kailangan mo ng enough sleep for 90 minutes. So, in your review, guys, if inanto ka na, sleep for at least 90 minutes para meron kang proper na consolidation of your information na binasa. At hindi ka groggy pagkagising mo. Kasi definitely pag nagising ka at groggy ka pa, baka matulog ka ulit in the process. So, sayang ang ating oras. Take note, guys, that beta waves are very prominent during REM sleep. Para kang gising. It's actually same with your state of being awake, alert, and having eyes open. Parehong beta waves ang ating EEG activity. Pag gising ka, at nakadilat ka, at kapag ikaw REM sleep. But iba sa ating non-REM sleep. You have your spectrum of slow waves. Okay? Coming from theta waves hanggang maging delta waves ka. Delta waves having the very deepest state of sleep. Now guys, per stages, iba-iba po sinasabi ng literature and references books. Okay, but rest assured guys, it's not so testable. Basta kailangan alam mo na slow waves ang involved sa ating non-REM sleeping. Okay, so for that guys, huwag kabahan, iba-iba talaga ang references. Iba kay Guyton, iba rin kay Bernon-Levy. Okay? But definitely guys, kailangan mo malaman na kapag ikaw ay awake, chill ka lang, and eyes are closed, dapat alpha waves ang predominant dyan. And it is confirmed by these EEG tracings. As you can see, alpha waves kapag awake at rest ka, and eyes are closed. Para kang relax. Okay? Pero pag gising na gising ka, nakadilat ka pa, beta waves are very active. Okay? During NREM sleeping, usually, nauuna ang ating theta waves bago ka magkaroon ng delta waves, which we have a very, very slow sleep, deep sleep siya. So guys, basically, ganito yan. Relax state. Alpha waves ang tawag siya. Pero pag bibong-bibo ka, gising ng mata mo, dilat na dilat ka, okay, kahit ikaw ay nagdi-dream, okay, ikaw ay bibong-bibo pa rin. During REM sleep, ang waves mo ay beta wave state sila. But as you go deep into the sleep, deep to the sleep, delta waves now ang tawag sa ating EEG tracings. Okay? Very testable dyan, guys. Alpha and beta waves. Now, guys, this is not found in your handout, but you have to know this pathway. It's very important. Now, circadian rhythm plays a crucial role in regulating the timing of sleep and wakefulness. Body temperature, hormonal secretion because some hormones are preferred to be secreted during the state of sleep. Okay, and it follows a roughly 24-hour cycle. So we have here two important structures. Suprachiasmatic nucleus found in the hypothalamus just above the optic chiasm. Take note, just above the optic chiasm. While the pineal gland is found at the tectum near the superior colliculus. Diyan siya makikita. Now, your suprachiasmatic nucleus is the master circadian pacemaker of the body. Okay? Para ma-activate siya, kailangan ng light. And it joins with the optic chiasm para magkaroon siya ng konting fibers from the chiasm going to the structure para alam niya if meron bang liwanag sa labas. Now, ginagawa niya kung ano ang interpretation niya with the light, it communicates with the pineal gland via norepinephrine. So, suprachiasmatic nucleus sends norepinephrine to the pineal gland. Now, ano mangyayari? The pineal gland secretes melatonin, the sleep hormone. If merong light na nakita si suprachiasmatic nucleus, melatonin is not secreted kasi kailangan mong gumising. Umaga kasi. Pero if walang liwanag, nakikita si suprachiasmatic nucleus, melatonin will be secreted na. Kasi ang ibig sabihin ay nighttime na. Kailangan mo na natulog. So melatonin will be increased causing the induction of sleep in the process. Guys, overall for sleep, take note that rest is productive. Rest if you must, but don't you quit. And you must rest for at least 90 minutes bago ulit mag-aral kapag ikaw ay inaantok. Okay? Now we go to language. One of also your higher cortical functions. Let's first talk about dominance. Now usually, ang dominant talaga ay yung left cerebral hemisphere. This may involve in language and lesions involved in the dominant hemisphere can lead to aphasia. With the right cerebral hemisphere naman, the one not involved in dominance, is usually involved in face expression, spatial associations, and body language. Guys, it's found, please take note of this concept, take them down in your handout. Now, language, okay, it's mainly a function of the dominant hemisphere, usually the left cerebral hemisphere. So take note, guys, put in your handout. This is the Broca area. It is involved in the production of speech and is found in the inferior gyrus of the frontal lobe. The Broca's area is found at the frontal lobe. The Wernicke area is found at the superior gyrus of your temporal lobe. Okay, temporal lobe makikita ang ating Wernicke area. And it's involved in comprehension. Guys, Broca, bumubuka. Okay, your mouth is more anterior than your brain. Therefore, Broca is found at the anterior part of your brain, sa frontal lobe natin. At Broca, dahil bumubuka ang mukha mo, you are performing speech production. While the Wernicke is found at the temporal lobe, is mainly for comprehension. Now, the connection between the Broca and Wernicke area is known as your arcuate fasciculus. Now, in aphasia, you have a problem here of your language. Depende kung ano ang lesion na involved. If you have Broca aphasia, also known as expressive aphasia or memory aphasia, ang problema dyan, guys, is your frontal lobe. Okay, dahil andun si ating Broca area. Okay, dito you can understand pero hindi ka makapagsalita. Kasi nga, hindi ka makabroka, hindi ka makabuka ng bibig. So wala kang masabi pero you can understand properly. In Wernicke area problem, sorry, guys, this should be aphasia. In your Wernicke aphasia, also known as receptive aphasia or sensory aphasia, you can say something but you cannot understand. Hindi mo siya maintindihan kasi nga problematic ang yung Wernicke area, the one involved in comprehension. Now, in conduction aphasia, ang problema ay yung ating arcuate fasciculus. You can understand, you can say something, pero hindi sila nagko-connect together. You have poor repetition only. Okay, only poor repetition is found, therefore, baka meron kang conduction aphasia. What is poor repetition? Pag sinabi ko to, hindi mo siya maulit. That's poor repetition. But in general, guys, all of three of these have poor repetition. Okay, kapag natira lang ay poor repetition, most likely yung problema ay yung arcuate fasciculus mo, causing conduction aphasia. Now we go to memory, also one of your higher cortical functions. Now, memory can be defined depending on duration. Kapag short-term memory ka, of course, it only lasts for a couple of minutes. And it involves mainly synaptic changes only. Meaning, mga chemical changes lang siya na involved dito. Pero pag long-term ka na memory, mas matagal siya. Kasi this time, nagkaroon ka na ng structural changes in the nervous system, allowing you to have a long-term memory. Meron ka ng physical change, kumbaga. And memory can also become declarative or explicit memory. It's about knowing what and knowing episodic events. For example, semantics. Who is the president of the Philippines? Who is the reigning Miss Universe at present? Okay? So here are the involved organs as seen in your handout. While episodic naman, which are mainly about events, involved dyan ang ating hippocampus, middle temporal lobe, or neocortex. For example, your memories about your 18th birthday, mga ganun bagay. Or yung last time na pumarty ka, tapos nalasing ng konti. Okay, those are episodic types of memory. Now, you can also have non-declarative memory or implicit memory. These are actually knowing how. They're more likely are procedural in nature or mostly used for associative learning. So, pag procedural ka, you have your striatum, cerebellum, motor cortex. Kapag perceptual, neocortex, ano na pag mga planning, ganyan. And kapag meron kang associations, you'll have your amygdala and cerebellum. But what I would like you to know here, or actually not found in your handout, it's about consolidation. It refers to the conversion of short-term memory to long-term memory. So, kailangan dyan ng rehearsal, kailangan ng tulog, kailangan ng proper nutrition. Therefore, I suggest eating while listening to this lecture kasi it promotes consolidation after, lalo na if you fall asleep. Now, memories are not localized in a single specific area of the brain, but rather they are encoded and distributed across various brain regions that work together to form and retrieve memories. But two critical areas of the brain are involved in memory formation: your hippocampus and thalamus. Hippocampus is mainly for the initial step in encoding and consolidation of memories. It's for the temporary storage lang siya, but not the full storage, or not the permanent storage rather. While thalamus, that's the one that consolidates memory as a whole. It transforms short-term to long-term memories in the process. Now, if the hippocampus is damaged, like for example, trauma or pag stroke ka, you can have anterograde amnesia. You cannot form new memories, especially if both hippocampus are involved. While when the thalamus is involved, you can have retrograde amnesia. You cannot recall old memories. Hindi mo na maalala yung mga long-term memories mo kasi nga sira yung storage mo for it. And of course, if meron kang anterograde amnesia, kasi nangyari dito, wala kang temporary storage, kailangan mo siya para magkaroon ka ng long-term memory. So you can't form new memories in hippocampal damage, and you can't recall memories in the thalamic damage. Temperature is mainly controlled by your thalamus. Okay, the thalamus is the organ serving as the center for thermoregulation, among other functions. Okay, more on that in endocrinology. Okay, now the area of the hypothalamus involved are as follows: the anterior and posterior. Anterior is involved in cooling for heat loss and also parasympathetic stimulation. Of course, if malamig na, di ba, magandang samahan mo ng chill lang, di ba? So, para sympathetic tayo. Take note of aircon. Aircon, malamig, di ba? Cooling siya. So, aircon, A, anterior, con, cooling. Pag posterior hypothalamus ka naman, is involved in heating, heat gain. So, pag mainit, di ba, stressful ka, di ba? So, it also has sympathetic stimulation. Mas stress ka in the process. Now, the balance between detected temperature by the heat sensor of the skin and the hypothalamus ultimately, and your set point temperature in the hypothalamus is important kung kailan ka magkakaroon ng gain of heat or loss of heat. So when the detected temperature of the body is higher than the set point temperature, you will have heat loss. Kasi nga mataas ang temperature na yung katawan. Pero pag konti lang siya, when compared to set point temperature, the effect is to have a heat gain process. Now, what happens in fever induction? In fever induction, the body is exposed to pyrogens, mostly coming from bacteria organisms. And when pyrogens are seen, ang katawan mo, the immune system, will now release your IL-1, IL-6, and TNF. And they will help each other out to form PGE2, your prostaglandin E2, one of the members of your arachidonic pathway. Okay, more on that in biochemistry. Na nangyayari, your PGE2 communicates with the hypothalamus. Where in the hypothalamus, in terms of fever, ang ginagawa niya ay, the hypothalamus increases the set point temperature. Now, kapag tumaas ang ating set point temperature, the hypothalamus, it's higher than your body temperature, kailangan mo magkaroon ng gain of heat, right? So with that, magkakaroon ka ng fever in the process. So paano nangyari yan? Usually, nagkakaroon ka ng chills in the process, di ba? The contraction of your skeletal muscles. So with that, you will have heat as an output of the work of your muscles. Now, this is mainly for supplementation, guys. This is not found in your handout, but I suggest you put them down in your handout for future reference. They can be testable in the board exams. Lesions of the brain. Okay, for some lang to, okay guys ha. So one, we have your medial longitudinal fasciculus, usually seen in multiple sclerosis. If meron kang lesion dyan, magkakaroon ka ng internuclear ophthalmoplegia, having impaired adduction of the ipsilateral eye and nystagmus of the contralateral eye with abduction. If the dominant parietal cortex is involved, nagka-lesion siya, you will have your very famous Gerstmann syndrome. And you should know the components of the syndrome: agraphia, acalculia, finger agnosia, and left to right disorientation. Now, kapag naman, ang involved lesion ay makikita sa ating non-dominant parietal cortex, magkakaroon ka ng tinatawag na hemispatial neglect syndrome, when you will have the agnosia of the contralateral side of the body. Imagine you have a line right down the middle of your body, dividing it to left and right sides. Now, picture yourself only paying attention to the things on one side of that line, while ignoring or not even realizing things on the other side. Okay? For some patients with hemispatial neglect, they might only eat food from one side of their plate, only put makeup on one side of their face, or only draw on one side of a picture. They might bump into objects on the other side, like door frames or furniture, pero hindi nila napapansin. That is known as your hemispatial neglect syndrome. So, if galit ka sa friends mo, or sa partner mo, at meron kang hemispatial neglect syndrome, naku, ilagay mo sila sa contralateral side, sa side na merong involved ng ating hemispatial neglect syndrome, para hindi mo sila mapansin basically. Okay? Now, you also have your mammillary bodies when they are having problems, especially if bilateral ang involvement natin. Then have your Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, mainly seen in vitamin B1 or thiamine deficiency and chronic alcoholism. They can lead to confusion, ataxia, nystagmus, and ophthalmoplegia. Okay, guys, you want to hear? Think of a can o beer. Can o beer, think of alcoholism. Okay, can cause mammillary body atrophy. When the amygdala is involved, it can lead to your Kluver-Bucy syndrome. Usually seen in HSV1 encephalitis kasi it damages the temporal lobe kung saan makikita ang ating amygdala. And it can lead to disinhibited behavior. You have hyperphagia, mas matakaw ka, you are more sexual, gusto mo makipag-sex in the process. Okay? Now, if the RAS is involved, which is found mainly in the midbrain, it can lead to coma. Okay, having poor arousal and poor wakefulness. And you are not responsive to pain stimuli. Again, guys, comatose ka if you have no pain stimuli na nararamdaman. Okay? And lastly, we have the Parinaud syndrome when the dorsal midbrain is involved. Usually seen in pinyaloma. Again, guys, at the dorsal midbrain, you have your pineal gland. Okay, so you can see in the image here. And siya. If there's a mass here, pwede siyang lumaki, di ba? And can cause paranoid syndrome. You lead to vertical disc palsy, lid retraction, pupillary light near dissociation, and convergence, retraction, nystagmus. If you have these features, guys, baka meron siyang paranoid syndrome, okay? So take note for a possibility of having a pinealoma located at the dorsal midbrain. Okay, guys, please take note of these lesions and put them down in your handout. So, guys, these are the basic concepts of neurophysiology. I hope nakatulong siya at I hope na nawala ang takot in neurophysiology. Okay, once again, I'm Dr. Rubio, your friendly neighborhood IM resident. And of course, see you around in Top Notch, also in biochemistry and microbiology. So guys, ingat, okay, stay safe and see you around. Okay, goodbye guys. Kaya-kaya niyo yan.